The streets of Scotswood were like any other in the industrial north of England. Children played in the alleys, neighbors exchanged gossip over garden fences, and families, no matter how troubled, kept their secrets behind closed doors. But in the spring and summer of 1968, something happened in Scotswood that shattered the fragile innocence of that working-class neighborhood forever. An 11-year-old girl with wide eyes and a soft voice became the face of something unimaginable. Not a victim, not a bystander, but a killer. She was a child who left small, lifeless bodies behind her, then stood silently at the edges of crowds as police pieced together her crimes. Her name was Mary Bell, and her story, unsettling, incomprehensible, and without remorse, would haunt Britain for generations to come. Mary Bell was not the first child to kill, but she was one of the youngest ever to stand trial for murder in British history. Her case sparked outrage, fascination, and profound discomfort. How could a child so young, just 10 years old when the violence began, be capable of calculated cruelty? Was she born evil, or was she created by the world around her? Over the next couple of minutes, we will unravel the tragic life, chilling crimes, and controversial legacy of Mary Bell, the 11-year-old serial killer who showed no remorse. Newcastle upon Tyne, in the heart of northern England, was a place of stark contrast in the 1950s and 60s. Working-class neighborhoods clung to tradition, while the distant hum of modernity crept into their streets. Amid this uneasy evolution stood a small girl, born into circumstances that seemed almost designed to fracture her fragile mind. Mary Flora Bell entered the world on May 26, 1957. Her arrival overshadowed by instability from the very beginning. Her mother, Betty, a woman known to the community for her erratic behavior and rumored sex work, was no maternal anchor. Betty's turbulent personal life left little room for tenderness. In fact, it was whispered that Betty's first reaction to her newborn daughter wasn't joy, but something far darker. The men who drifted in and out of their home were transient ghosts to Mary, none staying long enough to become a father figure, yet each leaving traces of their presence in bruises, silences, and whispered arguments behind thin walls. Mary's early years unfolded under the shadow of neglect, where affection was as rare as quiet nights. The mother-daughter bond that should have shielded Mary from the world became something twisted, a toxic mixture of rejection and chaotic attention. Behavioral red flags surfaced almost as soon as Mary could walk. The local children whispered about her unsettling games, suffocating playmates, squeezing pets too hard, watching with eyes too calm when her actions left others crying. Teachers noted her erratic temper, at times eerily quiet, then suddenly ferocious. Yet in a neighborhood accustomed to hard edges, her actions were rarely seen for what they truly were. Warnings of what was to come. May the 25th, 1968. 4-year-old Martin Brown, a curious and trusting boy, wandered out into the familiar streets near his home. Hours later, his lifeless body was found inside a boarded-up house, lying unnaturally still on the dusty floor. There were no obvious signs of violence, no weapon discarded nearby. His death was initially ruled an accident, though whispers spread quickly among the children. Whispers of a girl seen nearby, a girl with dark hair and a gaze that lingered too long. The neighborhood held its breath, unwilling to believe that death had crept into their quiet enclave. Shock swallowed the community whole. Children were supposed to be safe in their own neighborhoods, where neighbors watched from windows and front doors stood open in the afternoon air. But safety, it seemed, was no longer guaranteed. The death of Martin Brown cast a shadow over Scotswood, one that would only deepen in the weeks to come. July 31st, 1968. This time the victim was even younger, 3-year-old Brian Howe. His small body was discovered on a patch of wasteland, a place where children often played among broken glass and rusted metal. What was found alongside his body disturbed even hardened investigators. Tiny scissors had been used to carve initials into his flesh. His hair had been cut, not with care, but with deliberate cruelty. The marks were childish in execution, but chilling in intent. The killing was no accident. It was intimate, controlled, evidence of a mind that took pleasure in pain. The killing of Brian Howe marked a sharp shift. The line between impulse and premeditation had been crossed. What began as fragmented acts of violence had evolved into something more deliberate, something rehearsed. The desire for control, over life, over death, had blossomed into action. Detectives faced an uncomfortable truth. The killer they sought was not a monster lurking in the shadows. The killer was small, the killer was young, and the killer lived among them. As officers canvassed the neighborhood, one name came up again and again: Mary Bell. Mary, who had been seen near the crime scenes. Mary, who had shown a disturbing fascination with the murders. Mary, who had even guided a grieving family member to the exact location of Brian Howe's body, her face blank as she stood over the spot. She didn't shy away from police scrutiny. Instead, she hovered near the investigation, listening closely, asking unsettling questions. "Do you miss him?" she asked Brian Howe's sister. "Do you cry for him?" Her presence unnerved detectives, but it was her drawings, crude depictions of the crime scenes, of the bodies, of the mutilation, that finally shattered the illusion of childhood innocence. On August 5th, 1968, Mary Bell and her friend Norma Bell, they were unrelated but often seen together, were brought in for questioning. Mary's composure shifted between blank indifference and fits of calculated tears. Norma, frightened and overwhelmed, broke under pressure. The truth, pieced together from children's testimonies and physical evidence, painted a picture almost too horrific to believe. Two little boys, murdered not by a man lurking in the dark, but by a girl no older than 11. December 5th, 1968. The trial began under a media spotlight that felt almost voyeuristic. Crowds gathered, straining for a glimpse of the small girl accused of crimes that defied comprehension. Inside the courtroom, Mary sat almost motionless, her face a mask of practiced detachment, her eyes unblinking. The prosecution laid out the case with clinical precision. The disturbing confessions, the drawings, the chilling remorselessness. The defense, grasping for explanation, pointed to her upbringing, her exposure to violence, her mother's neglect. The child had become the product of her environment, they argued, a mirror reflecting every cruelty inflicted upon her. In the end, the jury found Mary Bell guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. At 11 years old, she became one of the youngest convicted killers in British history. Mary was placed in secure custody, shuttled between facilities ill-equipped to handle a child who killed. Her behavior remained unpredictable, veering from sullen silence to sudden outbursts. Years passed, and the little girl transformed into a young woman. In 1980, at the age of 23, Mary was released. New identity, new home, new life, or at least the illusion of one. The British government shielded her identity under a lifelong anonymity order, a rare legal protection. Yet the media, ever hungry, chased her ghost, uncovering fragments of her new existence. Mary, they discovered, had a daughter of her own, a child unaware of her mother's past. Experts dissected her case for decades. Psychologists pointed to early trauma, severe neglect, possible sexual abuse, as the seeds of her later violence. But understanding was never comfort. Could her actions be prevented, or was she born broken? The Mary Bell case forced the UK to reconsider how it handled young offenders. New guidelines emerged for assessing juvenile mental health, though debates still rage. Can a child be truly irredeemable? The story of Mary Bell lingers, not just for the horror of her crimes, but for the uncomfortable questions they force us to ask. Who is truly responsible? The child, the parents, the system? And if monsters are made, not born, where does the cycle end? Subscribe for more stories that delve deep into the shadows, where the line between victim and villain blurs, and every truth hides another layer beneath. You should also tell me what you think about this case.